Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Sir Hunt on X on this 25th of November 2025, 2 days away from Thanksgiving. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful day today. Tonight is a legendary night for just one simple reason and one simple reason only. It's an event that took place 45 years ago at the Superdome in New Orleans, Louisiana, and a night that still remains a mystery 4.5 decades later. And there's still a lot of questions that have to be answered still because the combatants are still involved in it, still don't want to talk about it for whatever reason, especially one key piece. And because they don't want to talk about it, it still leaves this thing a mystery, leaves this thing with questions that have to be answered. And the rest is just going to have to take care of itself because there's some people that are stinging from what took place 45 years ago tonight at the Superdome in New Orleans, Louisiana. This was the rematch for the welterweight championship between Roberto Duran and Sugar Ray Leonard. And 5 months after Roberto Duran shocked Ray Leonard to win the welterweight championship when he made the jump from lightweight to welterweight, this was a fight where basically when this was after, let me back up. After Roberto Duran beat Ray Leonard in the first encounter, Sugar Ray Leonard accepted defeat, but he wanted the rematch as soon as possible because he knew that after Roberto Duran won the first fight, Duran was living a lifestyle outside of the ring where basically the guy was basically the equivalent of eating and taking care of his body, allowed his weight to implode, allowed his weight to get over what it needed to be because he was partying after celebrating probably the biggest win of his historic career when he beat Ray Leonard, what was equivalent of 5 months before. And Ray Leonard knew it and basically told his people, basically his trainer, his manager, basically saying, "Give me the rematch now. I want it." Knowing Roberto Duran was going to have to weight cut to make the 147-pound limit, which we know was going to be a challenge for him. And as a result, they put together the rematch. Carlos Aleta, the manager of Roberto Duran, and Don King put together an insane offer right off the bat, and Roberto Duran wasn't aware of it. And when everything was presented to Roberto Duran after the fact, what turned out in the end was they told him, "We're going to have the rematch November 25th, 1980. Duran wasn't aware about it and told Carlos Aleta, "You're crazy. I'm not even ready for it." Because his lifestyle is outside the ring. Remember, he was walking around as much as 190 pounds outside the ring between the two fights with Ray Leonard. And that's why they got the rematch so quick. And they knew it was going to be such a financial bonanza that Sugar Ray Leonard basically said, "Yeah, I know the guy is going to be partying. Let me just catch him off guard and get the rematch as soon as possible." Durant, Ray Leonard knew it. And because he knew it, that's why we had what we had when this contract signing took place. Not much building up had to be done because you talk about one of the bigger financial bonanzas where both fighters were guaranteed a guarantee at the time, which was massive, of at least $15 million. That's why Don King and Carlos Aleta pressed hard for the Duran rematch with Ray Leonard as soon as possible because he knew it was going to be a hit. And Leonard pressed harder for it, not just because of the financial bonanza, but because he wanted his title back and he knew Duran was basically not giving a darn after he beat Leonard the first time. So that's what we had with this particular rematch. And because of it, we finally had everything that took place. Basically, you can tell in all the build-ups of anybody who watched what took place 45 years ago with the television build-ups. You can see the look on Roberto Duran's eyes as he was uh, doing Spanish interviews with his manager and interpreter, Luis Hernandez, next to him. You can see it in Roberto Duran's eyes as if to say, you know, he doesn't look like he looked like he was ready for this. He had a look of concern, which is unthought of when you consider how Roberto Duran was built up through his time as a lightweight, even his time as a welterweight, and when he beat Ray Leonard in the first fight. And because of it, that's why we had what we had when we talk about how quick this rematch started. And because of it, that's why Ray Leonard wanted the rematch immediately. He didn't want to take any other tune-up fights. He didn't let Durant take any other voluntary title defenses. He wanted an immediate rematch, and he got it. his trainer, Mike Trainer, basically said, let's get it done. And that's why they pressed hard and quickly for what took place 45 years ago tonight at the Superdome in New Orleans, Louisiana. When you talk about delivering, getting paybacks, winning your title back as soon as possible, fighters either want to take their time or they just want to at least wait it out or try and string it out. Ray Leonard didn't want to string this out. He wanted it not at that point, was technically at the now moment, because Roberto Duran, after he beat Ray Leonard, lived a Cloud 9 lifestyle, and Ray Leonard knew it. And that's why he pressed hard to get it as a quick turnaround immediately on the spot. And that's why we had what we had take place 45 years ago tonight. It was billed as Stone and Sugar. Of course, Roberto Duran, the nickname Hands of Stone, Manos de Piedra, versus Ray Leonard, of course, Sugar Ray Leonard. On closed circuit, later retelevised by ABC. Lots of storylines of the ABC version of it. I'll get to it in the end. And in the first fight, everybody knows the build-up for that one who saw this. Roberto Duran was doing everything he can to get into Ray Leonard's head, and he did it by taunting him, taunting his wife, saying, after I beat Ray Leonard, I'm going to take you to the hotel room and sleep with you. And got into Ray Leonard's head by Ray Leonard's admission. He basically said, I let it happen. This time, he didn't let it happen. He basically said, I had the formula to beat him. I know how to beat him, and I'm going to utilize it. If we talk about this particular rematch, started out pretty darn good. And one of the bigger moments before the fight began was Ray Charles, the standout Ray Charles, singing the national anthem, or excuse me, God Bless America. And it was Sugar Ray Leonard who approached Ray Charles. So, you know, the real name of Ray Leonard is Ray Charles Leonard. So he's approaching his namesake. And Ray Charles just quietly whispered into the ear of Sugar Ray Leonard, go out there and kick his butt. And you had a feeling Ray Leonard was going to get back what was rightfully his. And that is what took place 45 years ago tonight. The Superdome, New Orleans, Louisiana, built up as Stone versus Sugar. Roberto Duran, you probably had the distinction of the best fighter pound for pound at that point, taking on Ray Leonard, who was looking to unseat Duran for that particular distinction. Now, it was 3 years after what took place in New Orleans when Muhammad Ali won his third world title against Leon Spinks and ended that run. And because of it, they were looking for a marquee persona. And you had two guys with that sort of persona that's going to take that throne, because Muhammad Ali had basically retired, because it was 2 months after, about a month and a half after he lost to Larry Holmes. And that void was about to be filled by whoever won this rematch. Story of this rematch was this time, even though Ray Leonard and Roberto Duran had moments where they mixed it up, this time it was Sugar Ray Leonard who made sure he wasn't going to get caught into Roberto Duran's macho game again, like happened 5 months before in Montreal. He was using the ring, making Duran miss, making him pay. And as the fight was going on, and because he started to feel confident about himself, Ray Leonard started to taunt Roberto Duran and really started to frustrate him, to the point where Roberto Duran just swinging and missing out of nowhere. And because of it, that's why we had what was about to happen, because Ray Leonard knew he got into Roberto Duran's head. And you talk about Roberto Duran, one of the most built up and, hyped up and toughed out fighters. Now all of a sudden, he's frustrated and he's all over the place, and he's become a hot mess. And Sugar Ray Leonard was just taunting him for the next 3 to 4 rounds. And now he's starting to pull ahead. He has a fight under control, fighting at his pace. And as Roberto Duran just basically frozen out and freaking out, because Roberto Duran can't get inside and do anything to him. And Ray Leonard made sure he wasn't going to let it happen. So as the round was going on, now we get the real taunting part, where Sugar Ray Leonard starts to do his magical bolo punch. It's the wind-up punch, and Roberto Duran is just sitting there just doing nothing about it. And you expect Duran to actually go get him, which he wasn't. And because of it, that's why Roberto Duran was basically just frustrated and mad. He couldn't do anything to Roberto Duran. Sugar Ray Leonard, I apologize. And now Leonard has Duran under control, and now he's in control of the fight because up until that point, now he started to take the lead on the scorecards. After the first 3 or 4 rounds, basically both guys were mixing it up, and it was like it was going to be a competitive affair. But now Leonard takes over, and after 7 rounds, he's starting to have control of the fight. But we fast forward to the moment that has everyone polarized and forever defined in boxing history, always possible. At the end of halfway through round 8, as Leonard was still taunting Duran, out of nowhere, Roberto Duran turns to the corner, his own corner, waves his glove as if to say, no more, or the phrase, no mas. First time he turned it around, Leonard didn't know he was legit, so he goes after Duran with a couple shots to the body. And at that point, Duran just shook his head, waved his arm, saying, no mas, that's it, the fight's over. And Ray Leonard, 5 months after losing the title to Roberto Duran, regains the middleweight championship by a unanimous decision on a technical knockout in round 8 by basically making Roberto Duran say, I quit. No mas, or Duran's words, in real words to Howard Cosell, no siga, which means I don't want any more. He was getting the business handed to him by Sugar Ray Leonard, and everything went crazy for the longest time, and it started immediately after this fight. Because after Sugar Ray Leonard won, of course, he was parading around the ring with his hands in the air. But when you talk about what happened between Ray Leonard and Roberto Duran in this rematch, and what happened to Roberto Duran afterward, talk about hitting the bottom. It started with this, because the question everyone still asks that from that point to today, 45 years later, what happened? Why did Roberto Duran say no mas? So, revealed, he tells his interpreter, Luis Hernandez, make up something, because, everybody's still asking what happened. So he's interviewed by Howard Cosell, the ABC version of the Leonard Duran fight, and essentially saying, what happened. So Luis Hernandez makes something up like, okay, the guy has stomach cramps, which basically he later said Roberto Duran just quit. Nothing else happened. He just quit, and that was it. But that loss broke a lot of people in the Duran camp, most notably his trainer Ray Arcel and manager Carlos Arleta. And after that, and basically both guys threw Roberto Duran under the bus. Basically, Carlos Arleta said, "You had time to prepare for the fight. Don't come to me because of it, because you had time to prepare to beat Sugar Ray Leonard in New Orleans, but you didn't train yourself." And Ray Arcel basically said, "I've had enough. I'm done dealing with this guy. I'm leaving him. The guy should just flat out retire after this." Because this guy, Roberto Duran, what's about to happen to him was absolutely going to be the effects of one of the most crazy downward spirals. I'll touch on that when it goes about his Panama aspect in a second. But days after and weeks after what took place in New Orleans, Louisiana, was simply because Roberto Duran was as frustrated to heck. He was not going to lure Sugar Ray Leonard into his macho game like he did 5 months before in Montreal. That's exactly what happened. And because of that, that's why Roberto Duran did what he did. He tried to say he had stomach cramps. He had a digestive stomach. He had this. He had that. He blamed it on Carlos Arleta. He blamed it on Don King, which, as I said, they put the fight together so quick after the first fight that Roberto Duran wasn't even aware of it. And I talked about the Duran lifestyle outside of the ring. But because of what happened, that's why Roberto Duran did what he did. And because of his machismo, he's not going to say, I just quit because of it. He's just, like all fighters, they're going to use every excuse in the book. And when it comes to this one, from the Duran angle, he used every excuse in the book simply because Roberto Duran couldn't match Sugar Ray Leonard's style. And because he couldn't lure Sugar Ray Leonard to his style, and couldn't, get into Ray Leonard's head the way he did the first time and allowed Ray Leonard to get to his head. That's why we had this thing that took place in New Orleans. If moving forward for Roberto Duran, the backlash was through the roof. I mean, he had commercials in the States in his own country of Panama. They were pulled. He had members of the uh, around people that left him, and basically people who loved him now hated him. I mean, he couldn't step out of his house. It was so bad he had to get a lion to walk outside his home country of Panama because of it. And because of that, you want to talk about hitting the bottom? He found a way to hit the bottom because the wrinkle effect after what took place of No Mas really was all over the place. And I'll touch on the that part of him here in a second. But back to Ray Leonard. Another case of why this guy was the fighter of the 80s. I mean, he wanted this thing bad. He got it. He told his people, get out there, go get it. And he got it. And he wanted it. He knew he made the mistake in the first fight by letting Roberto Duran get into his head. This time, he made sure it wasn't going to happen twice. And it was him that got into Roberto Duran's head. And that's why Roberto Duran said, no mas. I mean, no more. And that was why Sugar Ray Leonard was one of the masters of performing at the highest level on the biggest stages of them all. And we talk about needing to fill a persona void after Muhammad Ali left. This fight, you could probably say, filled that void to an extent, and Sugar Ray Leonard did a heck of a job doing it. And we know what happened with him in the rest of his career. I'll get to that in a second. But back to this fight and everything that happened afterwards. In the ABC version, Ray Arcel, his trainer, being Roberto Duran's trainer, talked to Ray Arcel. Ray Arcel was broken. If you watch the Four Kings documentary or see it on the YouTube channels, it broke Ray Arcel. Because even Ray Arcel said pretty much, of all guys, I would expect to do this. Of all the guys, I would expect to do this. That's the last guy I would expect to say the words, I quit. And basically, he tried to find an explanation. He tried to come up with the solutions of why Roberto Duran said no mas, but couldn't. And because of how shocking that night was in New Orleans, the ricochet effect and the shock factor was still in the locker room of Roberto Duran. And even those around him are still trying to figure out how that happened. I mean, nobody knows. Because you're talking about Roberto Duran. I mean, as the baddest man on the planet at that time. I mean, this is before we coined the phrase of guys like Mike Tyson. Roberto Duran had the honest distinction of the baddest man on the planet because of how he beat Ray Leonard the first time. And he's blasted through the lightweight division with his courage, his machismo, his tough guy, warrior instinct, the hard punches, the strong chin. To all of a sudden do this, still had a lot of people wondering what happened. And no one could come up with a legitimate answer as to why this took place the way it did. And Duran immediately, for the short term, announced his retirement. Or you say retired. But after that, as I said, he hit the bottom. I mean, he couldn't do anything around his part of town. He had commercials in Panama and in the States. They were pulled after this. And he couldn't step out of his own house in Panama. He had stuff going at his house because that's what happened in Panama. And because of it, that's why Roberto Duran, for a 2.5-year period, just was irrelevant. I mean, even his wife said, sometimes I couldn't even talk to the guy because I don't know what's going on with his mind. It really bothered him that much, that bad, for the longest time. I mean, the short-term career after No Mas, he got a questionable title shot against Wilfred Benitez where he was just overly overwhelmed. Then came the bottom, a little closer to 2 years later, when he fought Kirkland Lang, an unknown, and basically had everything done to him. And Ray Arcel, his now former trainer, basically said, this guy is losing to a guy named Lang. This guy named Lang, a guy like you or I could beat, and Roberto Duran loses to him. I write this guy a letter saying, just hang it up. That's how bad it got for Roberto Duran post No Mas in the short term, in the immediate term, because of just to utter the phrase No Mas and basically the dark cloud that hovered it for the next 2.5 years. And we're still asking the question, still, what happened on that night in New Orleans? And Roberto Duran's still trying to come up with answers when that pride factor it overshadows the truth. It shows itself, and that's what happens every time the word "no mas" comes with Roberto Duran. He'll always come up with something as to why it happened. He has too much pride, as if to say, "Okay, I quit because Ray Leonard was a better fighter." You're not going to get that out of Roberto Duran. No way. He still made excuses about it. I mean, still does today. I'll touch on that in the end. But this night, a lot of things were broken. Of course, the biggest sin in boxing is always going to say you just can't say I quit. But we think about losing your trainer and losing a guy you call your father figure in Carlos Aleta, who essentially threw you under the bus, and even Don King, who threw you under the bus and basically told you to retire. It was close. It was near the end. I mean, you thought it was going to be the end because he hit the bottom. I mean, Duran basically just took shots at Carlos Aleta and Don King for rushing him into this rematch. And, you can probably say it happened because of everything I said earlier, where Ray Leonard said he wanted it quick, and Aleta and King knew a financial bonanza was going to come out of it. So they milked Duran for what he's worth. But of course, Aleta, from his point of view, basically said, you had 2 months to train. Don't come to me for it. You had 2 months to prepare for this. Don't say I'm the reason why this happened. You had 2 months to train. You didn't prepare yourself the right way, and that's why it happened. That's exactly what happened in the end. Of course, fighter manager, fighter promoter, we know how that goes. They always throw each other under the bus for some of the silliest stuff. So that was how the Roberto Duran angle came about. And here we are 45 years later wondering still why those 2 words came out of Roberto Duran's mouth. Now let's go back to Ray Leonard. We know what this spun off as probably the fighter of the decade. The 2-fight series with him and Duran began the 7-year run of the 4 Kings. We know the other 2 that were involved, Marvelous Marvin Hagler and Thomas Hearns. And I said all along, the 4 Kings era ended in 87 with Leonard and Hagler, but it started with Leonard Duran 1 and 2 in 2 fights where it was the ultra flip-flop in terms of boxing psychology, because of one fight you had Roberto Duran with a psychological edge who got into Leonard's head. But in the ultimate game of psychology, Sugar Ray Leonard got to Roberto Duran's head. And because that happened, that's why the words uttered 5 months later in New Orleans after their first fight in Montreal. And we know that 4 Kings run with Leonard Duran 1, Leonard Duran 2. Down the line, it was Hagler Duran, and then Hagler Hearns. Let me back up. I missed one. I apologize. It was Leonard Duran 1, Leonard Duran 2, and it spun off to the super fight of September 16th, 1981, between Leonard and Hearns, the first encounter. Then you had Hagler Duran, Hagler Hearns. We know the fight of that was Hearns Duran, and the capper was Leonard Hagler of April 6, 1987. That was your 4 Kings era right there from 1980 to 1987. And this 2-fight series started it. And when you talk about that, does that run to how this started it? When you become the focal point of your profession, as these 2 were in the basically for this 2-fight series, granted for flip-flopping reasons, everyone's going to want a piece of the pie. And that's what eventually happened with these 2, because both Hearns and Hagler came in and said, okay, you guys you want to start something with this? Put us into this. We want a piece of the action. Because that's how the 4 Kings era was. And I said all along, from Leonard Duran won in Montreal in June of 1980 to Leonard Hagler of April 6, 1987 will always be the era and the gold standard of how fights should be. And that's what Leonard Duran 1 and 2 had at the end of the day. Because it started it. Of course, they had the third fight in 1989, a nonsensical fight that had no business taking place. But as Thomas Hausler said about the third fight, take that fight, put it in a lockbox, go to the deep end of the ocean and sink it because it had no business taking place. That's what we had. We talk about Leonard Duran 3. That's why I don't talk about that in the Four Kings run. But we trace back to what took place 45 years ago tonight in New Orleans. Still a mystery. It's so much of a mystery to where it's like as if he won't admit it. Ray Leonard, in a way, maybe not be a strong word to use, but almost felt slighted because all the focus was on why Roberto Duran said no mas. And he wanted to answer why. Because there was a documentary, if you guys watched 30 for 30, a few years ago, there was a documentary where Ray Leonard traveled to Panama to visit Roberto Duran and say, why did you say no mas? Because I'm trying to put closure to this. Because the whole focus was why Roberto Duran said no mas, as opposed to why Sugar Ray Leonard made Roberto Duran say no mas. And when you watch this, whenever that night is brought up, it still gets to Roberto Duran to this day. And he basically said, told Ray Leonard, don't make a big deal out of it. You're still an all-time great. I have love and admiration for you. Just move on. It's as if one guy wanted closure and the other guy who put closure but didn't want to relive a dark night in what turned out to be not just his in-ring career, but also his personal life, because outside of it, the next 3 years after Roberto Duran said no mas, he hit the bottom in every which way possible. And Duran didn't want to relive it. Understandably so, because every time you talk about Duran, Leonard, no mas, Roberto Duran always finds a way to tiptoe and hopscotch around it. Understandably so, because that's how Roberto Duran is. And as I said earlier in the show, we talk about Duran and Leonard, the first fight, where basically it was like a grit and guts type of fight, which is what Roberto Duran wanted because he got into Sugar Ray Leonard's head. Second fight, flipped the script. Leonard fought the fight he wanted. He got into Duran's head, and that's what led to what happened. And of course, it's still a mystery 45 years later as to why Roberto Duran uttered the two words, no mas. And those two words stung the boxing landscape for about the longest time, and probably still does, just simply because people were wondering why Roberto Duran said, I quit. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Of course, there's even one of the sports producers, Alex Wallow, who was a producer of that fight, and for you fight followers, if you know, back in the 80s, one of the premier analysts for free television on ABC, basically said, it's to go from a bad man on the planet to what took place on that night in New Orleans is one of the all-time biggest mysteries and downfalls probably ever. And probably we talk about what took place in the first fight between Leonard and Duran, probably the most accomplishable feat in the career of Duran, going from lightweight to welterweight to beat a peaking Ray Leonard. To do this, still a mystery. And I've always said Roberto Duran, one of the bigger enigmas, because anything that happens always comes with a lot of questions, because there are people that sometimes prop him up to be such an unstoppable force. We talk about his days as a lightweight, where he went 71-1. And we think about after what happened in the first fight, you would think he would have the edge. Maybe there's a reason why Sugar Ray Leonard wanted this rematch so fast, and I mean so fast, to where we had the quick turnaround. What happened on that night in New Orleans was probably why. Because he knew he made the mistake the first time, letting Roberto Duran get into his head. But Ray Leonard knew it, and basically said, I'm not making the same mistake twice. I'm going to get into Roberto Duran's head. And little did the world know he would get into Roberto Duran's head so bad to where Roberto Duran would just simply check out. And how much of this affects Roberto Duran's legacy in the grand scheme of things is always going to be a hot topic when we talk about one of the premier icons of the sport. And Roberto Duran still is, no matter how hard you try to slice it and dice it. Yeah, it's a part of his legacy. It is. And even he knows it. But is it the end all be all of who Roberto Duran was? Far from it. I mean, his legacy wasn't always will be. Before this, when he ruled the rules of the lightweight division clean house, especially we talk about the trilogy with Esteban de Jesus and beating Ray Leonard the first time. Now, he did the best he could after bottoming out and having that embarrassing loss to Kirkland Lang by beating Davey Moore and giving Marvin Hagler the toughest fight of his career after Hagler was plowing through opponents and Duran took him the distance, to getting starched by Thomas Hearns and using excuses for that loss, and getting a nondescript loss to a fighter named Robbie Sims on the Leonard Hagler undercard, and beating Iran Barkley in basically a fight where both guys were hitting each other so hard, I'm surprised no decapitation happened. And then the third fight with Leonard, where even though it had no business taking place, in its own way, if you watch that fight, maybe Duran oddly said no mas and just wanted to go to distance with Ray Leonard just for a satisfaction and gratification. Because that's how the Duran legacy was. We talk about trying to rebound from no mas. Yes, it's a part of his legacy. It is. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Not just because of him, because of the ripple effect it had across both the sports and the cultural landscapes. Because everyone, regardless of profession you are in, you are asking the question, why did Roberto Duran say no mas? That's how much of a earth-shattering event November 25th, 1980 was in New Orleans, Louisiana. Not just in Louisiana, not just in Panama, which is Panama's Duran's home country, but globally. It's something everybody still asks, and is still asking today, why this happened. And Roberto Duran's done everything he can to give any kind of answer to not tell the truth, if that's how you want to paraphrase it, because that's what he's done. He's not going to say, I quit because I can't beat this guy. Too much pride, too much machismo. That's how the Latin American fighters are. I mean, as Steve Farhood said in the documentary, they're going to make every excuse imaginable. And that's what Roberto Duran did. But to call that the only thing in Roberto Duran's legacy shows immaturity and irresponsibility to the people who don't do the necessary research and studying. Because I said his legacy was before this, when he ruled the roost in the lightweight division, beating guys like Ken Buchanan, Esteban de Jesus, Ray Lampkin, Edwin Viret, among others, and eventually moving up to welterweight to beat Carlos Palomino, and the win over Leonard 5 months before this in Montreal. Excuse me. So that was more of what Roberto Duran's legacy was and is to this day. If anything after that, it's going to be always talked about. It's always going to be probably one of the bigger roller coasters and bigger enigmas when you think about coming from the bottom, from losing to Kirkland Lang, to beating Davey Moore, to going 15 rounds with marvelous Marvin Hagler, and then eventually getting knocked out by Thomas Hearns, losing to Robbie Sims, beating Iran Barkley, losing the third fight to Ray Leonard, and just carrying on really deeper into his career than really he should have, which is, we can say that for a lot of fighters, but Duran was a poster child of it. But after No Mas, a real roller coaster and almost in its own way a greater mystery, but Duran's legacy was sealed way before this, and that's where everybody needs to start understanding who this guy was at the end of the day. I mean, the No Mas thing is always going to be the forefront because of the shattering effect. It is. There's no denying that it is a part of his legacy. But big picture, maybe it's a bigger part of his legacy than some people, that is the purists think, but it's not his entire legacy. Let's just leave it at that. Because he did a lot of great things for the sport. We talk about the Four Kings run. I mean, he was a part of that terrific 80s run, fought off the other three guys, and basically ducked no one. And we talk about his tenure as lightweight, beat everybody, avenged that loss to De Jesus, especially in the third fight where he just beat the brakes off of him. That will be the Roberto Duran legacy, but no mas will always be attached to it. That's how it is. It can be simple, but also complicated and complex. But that's how the career of Roberto Duran was in and out of the ring post no mas. Now for Ray Leonard, the fighter of the 80s. It's a no-brainer. When you beat 5 world champions in a decade, we talk about Roberto Duran, Ayub Kaluli, Thomas Hearns, Marvin Hagler, and Donnie Lalonde. Case is closed. Plain and simple. I found it weird. This guy still was closer for no mas when he got it when Roberto Duran quit, because the focus was on Roberto Duran quitting and not how Sugar Ray Leonard made Roberto Duran say no mas. Now, at times, Leonard was a bit of an odd personality himself, even by his own admission. He'll tell you that. We talk about his battles in the past with substance abuse. But maybe for him, maybe slighted might be a strong word to describe Ray Leonard in this particular event. But the fact that he is still seeking closure is a bit of an eyebrow raiser, because he became the fighter of the 80s, won 5 world titles in that decade from 5 different world champions. No matter how you slice it up, you beat 5 world champions in a decade, you did something right. And that's what Ray Leonard did. But still, to look for closure for this night, when the focus was on how it happened, it's a bit of eyebrow raiser on his end. It doesn't impact his legacy, because the guy's still, the fighter of the 80s and probably a top 15 all-time pound-for-pound great. Granted, with an odd personality himself. But oddly, this guy wanted closure when he really got it. And we watched the documentary having to travel to Panama to ask to Roberto Duran's face, why did you quit? Something about this fight bothers Ray Leonard just as much as Roberto Duran. I don't know what it is. And for Ray Leonard, I don't know why it is. Because you did the job. You got your championship back. You wanted your immediate rematch. You got it. You got into Duran's head and made him say, I quit. But maybe for Ray Leonard, maybe that wasn't good enough for him, because he himself wanted his own satisfaction and gratification for that night. But in the grand scheme of things for him, for a period, maybe you could probably say something was missing. But as his career was going on, whatever void he was trying to fill, he filled it. I mean, you don't beat 5 world champions in a decade. And basically span of, it was like the equivalent of 6 years, about 8 years, when you talk about Duran in the rematch, Ayub Kaluli a year later, and then spun off to the unification fight against Thomas Hearns, to marvelous Marvin Hagler, and then, of course, the capper in 88 to Donnie Lalonde. And just not be nothing, and just totally be unsatisfied. Because Ray Leonard was more than satisfied how his career went. The guy was a fighter of the 80s, bar none. It's not even debatable. But trying to still seek closure for what took place 45 years ago in New Orleans, Louisiana, when everybody knows you was the right winner and you did what you did the right way, is an eyebrow raiser. And maybe, for Leonard's view, there's something there missing for him that maybe he's trying to find and put closure and fulfill it. I don't know what's there left for him to fulfill, because when he made Roberto Duran say, I quit, I mean, when he made him basically say, I quit, that's what happened to Roberto Duran. That was a satisfaction, because he wanted the rematch 5 months after he made the mistake of fighting Duran's fight that summer in Montreal, made the adjustment, got into Duran's head, and made him fight his fight. That was probably Ray Leonard's legacy in a nutshell. Just ability to step up on the big stage, ability to adjust on the fly, ability to correct your mistakes. And we talk about what he did, beating 5 world champions, winning 5 world titles in the 80s. We talk about the Roberto Duran rematch. a tough fighter from Africa named Ayub Kululi. A few months later, of course, the unification win over Thomas Hearns. The 87 stunner against Marvelous Marvin Hagler, granted with opinions all over the place. And the cappers when he beat down Donnie Lalonde on his way out. He was a fighter of the 80s. But maybe there's something on his end that he didn't like, and he wants an answer to what took place in New Orleans when he made Roberto Duran say no mas. It's a bit of an eyebrow raiser, but even Roberto Duran told Ray Leonard, you're admired, you're respected, just move on, it's over with. I mean, I know it's tough. It's tough for Roberto Duran to have to deal with it. No, I'm not going to say it's tough for Ray Leonard, but it raises eyebrows as to why you would go fly from Baltimore, Maryland, which is where he resides, over to Panama just to get answers from Roberto Duran when Roberto Duran's never given honest answers about it. And if he thought Roberto Duran was going to give him an honest answer about it, you should have thought again. Maybe the best thing that came out of that trip was a love and admiration the two fighters still had 45 years later after what took place in Montreal. Because there were times these two had some intense bad blood at the peak of that rivalry. And Ray Leonard said, I never was hit as hard as Roberto Duran hit me in their first fight. And that's why he made the adjustment to make sure he wasn't going to caught in Roberto Duran's macho game. And that's why he did what he did in New Orleans 45 years ago to make Roberto Duran say no mas. And it's still an earth-shattering mystery 45 years later because people still wonder what happened. People start asking questions what happened. And people are not getting honest answers. I mean, they were getting honest answers 45 years ago. And we're not going to get it now. As some of you late recap, the show was about the no mas 45 years ago between Ray Leonard and Roberto Duran. To cap off the Duran career afterwards, he hit the bottom. Everybody left him. I mean, Ray Arcel just basically said, I had enough. This guy didn't take this fight seriously, and I'm leaving him. And after he plummeted to the bottom against Kirkland Lang, Ray Arcel basically said he lost to a guy the casual human being can beat. Roberto Duran, give it up. Wrote him a letter. And Carlos Aleta and Don King threw Duran under the bus, saying, you had time to prepare, but you didn't. And Duran, but here's one thing everybody misses. Because an offer was so fast and so behind the scenes, and it was such a financial bonanza, they made it without Roberto Duran knowing, and they told Duran after the fact, you got the rematch against Ray Leonard. And Ray Leonard basically told Carlos Aleta, you're crazy. You're all local. That's what he basically did. And we see why. Yes, Duran had to have a massive weight cut, which didn't help him at all. But it still doesn't deter the fact that when he got into that ring, Ray Leonard did anything and everything he wanted to this time because he knew how to get to Roberto Duran, and he did. Unlike the first fight, whereas Duran got to Ray Leonard's head, in the ultimate game of boxing psychology, you weren't going to find a way to out-mind game Sugar Ray Leonard. At that time, Roberto Duran might have done it once. Ray Leonard made dang sure Roberto Duran wasn't going to do it twice. And that's what happened in New Orleans. In front of a packed house, still earth-shattered by what took place. Questions everywhere, all over the place. Answers still not concrete or inconclusive. We consider how Roberto Duran was built up. But the event happened. And it was a big bonanza. It was a worldwide event. And the fact that people are still talking about it 45 years later and still wondering what happened in New Orleans tells you the polarizing effect this event still has. And we have the winner, like Sugar Ray Leonard, still seeking closure for it. Tells you all I need to know. It was certainly an event. It was certainly something that was a big craze when you talk about this night. And we talk about the void that Muhammad Ali left after beating Leon Spinks to win the world heavyweight title 2 years before this in that same New Orleans Superdome. And what Sugar Ray Leonard did on that night to Roberto Duran, Leonard filled that void about as best as he could. Because you're not going to fill the personality void of Muhammad Ali, no matter how hard you try. And Ray Leonard, who had the charisma, who had that 1980 style afro as big as your high def screen, you probably see more of that than his face. And he did the best he could because you weren't going to replace Muhammad Ali. They needed some kind of a persona because of early part of the 80s. Nobody really, he had a bunch of blue collar guys, but no one with with a charisma that Ray Leonard had. And when he won this rematch against Roberto Duran, he was the guy. Just really a terrific 2-fight series all the way around. The ultimate game of human chess. We talk about the psychological aspect, but what made Ray Leonard tick? I talk about the physical nature, how nasty he was. From the mental and psychological nature, just the fact that he knows his way around the ring and your habits, and not to get suckered in the way he was the first time against Duran, was why his career turned out the way it did. And you could probably say this for Roberto Duran, and I said this a few weeks back about the Hagler fight. Maybe the best thing for his career post No Moss wasn't beating Davey Moore, wasn't beating Iran Barkley. It was the fact that he went toe-to-toe with Marvelous Marvin Hagler at the peak of the Four Kings era, when the Four Kings was at its apex, and just going the distance with the baddest man on the planet at that time in Marvelous Marvin Hagler was probably the gratification and satisfaction that he needed to do the best he could to erase the stigma of No Moss. Because he did all he could to win that fight. Marvin Hagler just buckled down and won the last 3 rounds. And probably, I think of the post No Moss version of Roberto Duran, probably his number one in defeat, finding a way to last the distance with Marvelous Marvin Hagler when everyone thought Hagler was going to steamroll him, and he was still under the stigma of No Moss. I mean, did he erase the stigma? Your opinion. I mean, it's going to go all over the place. As I said before, it's a part of his legacy. But Roberto Duran did the best he could to erase that stigma. It's sometimes in victory, sometimes in defeat. But maybe sometimes in defeat, we find out more about you than in victory. And we think about when Roberto Duran lost to Marvelous Marvin Hagler, maybe going the distance with one of the premier fighters of that time at the apex of the Four King era as the gold standard was probably the gratification and the satisfaction that he had after what took place in New Orleans 3 years earlier when he said no mas to Sugar Ray Leonard. And probably, you could probably say, that's probably the most satisfying thing that took place for him after the Four Kings era and after No Mas. Sometimes when you have this sort of a legacy that's stamped onto you, good, bad, pretty, or ugly, no matter how hard you sugarcoat it, it's going to have a polarizing effect. I mean, I won't say all positive, I won't say all negative, because it's going to be all over the place. The fact that I'm doing something like this 45 years later, and others have been doing something like this in recent years, and with this kind of an event, it's earth-shattering as this was. I'm not talking about taste of win and loss. We're talking about of the how. It's talked about still, and brings memories to your head, but also brings questions about it. That should tell you how polarizing of something of that magnitude took place. And if we consider that the winner of this event is still seeking closure, and Ray Leonard had to travel to Panama to get the answer straight out of Roberto Duran's mouth. I mean, that says a whole lot. When you had to go to a guy's country to get an answer from the guy's mouth, that says something. Maybe from the Ray Leonard angle, he was satisfied, but maybe not satisfied in the way you would think. Because he got his title back. He made Roberto Duran say, I quit. But maybe there was something missing for him in the sense that, okay, you said no mas, but everyone makes it about you saying no mas instead of me, making the adjustment and not letting you get into my head. And I want to know why it was. That's where the Ray Leonard angle gets a bit interesting. Because anybody who saw the the ESPN 30 for 30 when he flew over and having to ask Roberto Duran the question. And Roberto Duran basically said, look, you won the fight fair and square. You're the man. I mean, move on. It's done with. Ray Leonard was never going to get an honest answer from Roberto Duran no matter what. I mean, Roberto Duran wasn't given honest answers from when that night happened to today. And he's probably never going to give honest answers for as long as he lives about what took place 45 years ago in New Orleans. He'll never give that. I mean, that's just how the fighter pride works. I've said it. Those are the fight game will tell you that's how the fighter pride works. You'll settle to see, okay, I quit because the guy was a better man. But for Ray Leonard, to ask Roberto Duran this question for the longest time, actually, I think the documentary is like 2018 or early 2020s. I can't remember which. But for Ray Leonard to ask Roberto Duran about his angle of no mas as to why he did what he did, as great as Sugar Ray Leonard was, and he was surreally great. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Top 15, top 20 all time. But to ask a question about maybe the victory that catapulted you to the next level, maybe says something about him in the grand scheme of things that we don't know about. And maybe even though he was satisfied, maybe to an extent, maybe he wasn't satisfied, for the simple fact that he's still seeking closure for why that event took place and had the earth-shattering effect that it did. It says, I don't say it says tons, but it says something. It says something about Sugar Ray Leonard. And much love to Sugar Ray Leonard, the fighter of the decade. I said along, the premier fighter of the 80s, bar none. Number one fighter in the 1980s. And there's no number two. There's only number one in the 80s, and that was Sugar Ray Leonard. But to still see closure for something like this, I get the, as I said, about how earth-shattering the no mas was. But to try and see closure for something that was already done 30-some odd years later says something. What does it say? I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to be a psychologist. But maybe the best thing that happened with this was when he flew to Panama and Roberto Duran said, you are the better man. You're loved and respected. Just move on from it. And as he was driving back home, Ray Leonard basically said, I know why Roberto Duran quit. And I'll just leave it at that. And that's how everybody should leave it. It's going to be talked about forever because of how earth-shattering it was, given who it was that said no mas. But the questions will always linger why he said it. And it'll probably be gone forever and ever and ever for this life, because you can pull up all the results on all of this new wave AI, X-verse, or whatever you want to call it, but you're not going to get the complete honest answer. Let's just simplify it that. The fight came, the fight happened. Ray Leonard did not let Roberto Duran get into his head like the first fight. Actually, it was the other way around in the rematch. Maybe Roberto Duran say, I quit. And we just let that be. There's going to be questions all the time. I get it. And they're still asking questions about it 45 years later, because I'm trying to want to figure out answers myself. But the two fighters are all-time greats. This fight will always be attached to both fighters, more so on Duran than Leonard. But that's the end-all be-all for their legacies, because they're still two of the top 25 all-time great fighters. Like it or not. And we'll just leave it at that. And on that note, that'll wrap up this Super Show edition of Sirhan on X. I will be back tomorrow night. If you missed this show or any ones of in the past, you can catch them all on the iHeartRadio app, as well as the Apple and Spotify apps. And as always, make self-care your number one priority in all walks of life. If you take care of yourself first, all the good things will come your way. Take care of yourself, respect other people's boundaries, and protect your own boundaries. That's all that matters. And on that note, have a good rest of the night. Take care of yourselves. God bless. I'll see you guys tomorrow night.